So I think you know by now that your rabbis love anniversaries of historical events. Some of us really love anniversaries of historical events. We love to point out how this year it's been 50 years since this historic moment. That album was released 25 years ago today. That film came out 30 years ago. We just can't help ourselves. They hang out there and are screaming, in the Hebrew darsheni, that you should interpret me, right? Connect something to it. And this year is no exception. I am not a prophet, but I am willing to guarantee that at some point over the holidays you will hear it has been X number of years since, and then fill in the blank. For now, I want to highlight one in particular. It has been 120 years, actually 120 years in August, since the 6th Zionist Conference. Now, what makes this particular Zionist conference so interesting and important is that it was at this Congress, that Theodor Herzl floated what is commonly known as the Uganda Plan. By the way, it wasn't actually Uganda, we'll come back to that, but he floated it as a means to resolve the Jewish question. So let me give you a little bit of historical context of this moment. In the 1890s, Herzl had concluded that there was no future for the Jewish people on the European continent. The only answer to the question that countries were asking, what should we do with our Jews, was the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Palestine. This became Herzl's life work. It consumed him, traveling the world, meeting with world leaders, meeting with other Jews, raising money, doing whatever it took to turn this dream into a reality. And as things worsened for the Jews, Herzl came to believe that there was actually an intermediate step that could be taken, creating a temporary place of refuge for Jews who were under an existential threat, while still working towards the ultimate objective, a Jewish state in the land of Palestine. In October of 1902, Herzl began conversations with Joseph Chamberlain, the father, interestingly, of the future Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, at the time Britain's colonial secretary and most influential member of the cabinet, asking him to set up a Jewish colony somewhere in the vast British Empire. To condense what is an otherwise long story, on August 14th, 1903, the British officially offered land in East Africa to the Jews, calling it New Palestine. Not long after, Herzl presented this plan to the Zionist conference. He expected praise for what he saw as an intermediate step, but the Russian delegation was absolutely furious, walking out and accusing Herzl of giving up hope of return to the Promised Land. Post-conference, Chaim Weizmann pummeled Herzl in the press, questioning his commitment to Jewish nationalism. Others accused him of calling for the end of Jewish history somewhere in an African swamp. Now, I understand Herzl's intentions here. He was literally carrying the weight of the Jewish world on his shoulders. He had just witnessed a horrible pogrom in Kishinev, which really changed the course of Jewish history. Jews were suffering. They had to get out of Eastern Europe. So he considered the East African plan as an option. He had no way of knowing that this proposal would end up blowing the conference apart. And I find the image, the idea of Herzl leaving that place, believing that his life's work had been destroyed, unbelievably painful, only to be made worse because we know that Herzl will die 8 months later. In his papers found after his death was an unsent letter of resignation as president of the Zionist organization. Herzl wrote, "In accordance with my modest energies, I have created some instruments for the awakened Jewish people. I shall certainly not leave embittered or dissatisfied. I was richly rewarded far beyond what I merited and deserved by the love of my people. A measure of love such has seldom been bestowed upon individuals who had a far greater claim to such love than I did. I am not owed anything, Herzl writes. The Jews are a good people, but unfortunately also a profoundly unhappy people. May God continue to help them. Of course, we know how the story ends. The movement rebounded, came back together, and by 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, a public statement announcing the support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Herzl's hard, exhausting work had paid off. The dream of a Jewish state was miraculously one step closer to becoming a reality, but he had no way of knowing just how this story would play out. He had no way of knowing that the seeds he planted would take root. Sure, there were people before him who spoke about the need for a Jewish state and Jewish self-determination. Herzl didn't originate the idea of a Jewish state, but no one was able to convince his fellow Jews and world leaders that this had to happen. And just look at where we are today. Because Herzl had a dream and he acted on that dream, completely unaware of the ripple effects of his life work, he altered the course of Jewish history. It's a powerful message for us to remember, especially at this time of year. The choices that we make, what we do, how we do it, and with whom we do it matters, even if we may not know the final outcome of a given life situation. Maimonides brings this lesson home to our lives in his law code, in the book of the Laws of Repentance, where he makes a remarkable statement. He's been speaking about the balance of life. Each of us, he says, has merits and demerits, good deeds and bad deeds. And our lives are judged as a whole at the end of our life and also every year on Rosh Hashanah. Maimonides writes, even though the blowing of the shofar on the new year is a biblical decree, it nonetheless contains a deep meaning as if to say, awake, sleepers, from your sleep. Examine your deeds. Return in repentance. Throughout the year, everyone should regard him or herself and the world as if it is evenly poised between innocence and guilt. If you commit one sin, Maimonides says, you throw off the balance of the fate of the world, causing destruction. If you perform one good deed, Maimonides said, you can bring salvation and deliverance to others. That is the meaning of the biblical phrase he quotes in Proverbs, the righteous person is the foundation of the world, namely, that by acts of righteousness we will influence the fate and save the world. Maimonides reminds us that without this spiritual alarm of the shofar, we risk stumbling through our lives blissfully at times, unaware of the profound impact that we can have on others around us and the world at large. He reminds us that one act, one solitary act, can actually wield the power to change a life. Now, how does this come to pass? Our actions set in motion ripples of consequences that go out into the world, spiritual and psychological. That's exactly what Kennedy meant when he spoke to South African students in 1966. His sentiments as true then as they are today. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, Robert Kennedy said, or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he or she sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Our actions carry profound ramifications for others. They can't help but do so. We have the power to either grant comfort and support or to cause feelings of despair, isolation, A casual cutting remark that meant nothing to you can etch a scar that lasts a lifetime, while a word of encouragement, of praise, can breathe life and possibilities into someone's existence. Often we act without considering those potential consequences. We live in the present, absorbed by the moment that we are in, frequently oblivious to the far-reaching impact of our choices. That's precisely why the Jewish tradition sets aside this special time of year, which you heard about this morning, for the dedicated act of this personal inventory. The days of all are here. They've arrived. We are having slichot tonight. Next week at this time, we will be in this sanctuary for Rosh Hashanah. According to the Talmud, the month of Elul, and one of my favorite images where we are now, is described this special time as Hamelech Basadeh, that the sovereign is in the fields, right? God is more available to us than at any other time of the year. Now is the time to reflect on how we have used time, our most precious gift. Have we invested it with purpose? Have we been passive, letting time just happen? Did we utilize it only for personal gratification? Or did we actually bring blessing to other people's lives? It's at this time of year, in this moment, that we recognize the force and influence that's found in each one of us. Think about the words of Maimonides. A single act possesses the potential to transform an entire world. A solitary instant can actually validate our existence. As people of faith, we understand that we are far from powerless, that it's in our hands to initiate a chain of events with far-reaching consequences. I am here because years ago, 35 some years ago, a little boy invited me to his house for a Shabbat dinner, and his family opened up a world of Jewish living that I was unaware of. Herzl understood this. He embodied this, even though he didn't live to see the outcome of his efforts. And he inspires us to take a similar approach to our lives, even if our actions and our dreams will not result in something as monumental as building the Jewish state. We have the power to effect change, one act at a time. We can extend ourselves to others. We can write that note. We can make that Shiva visit. We can attend that life cycle event. We can perform acts of kindness. We can be present for others. And we can show up for community. Like Herzl, we may never know the full impact of those small acts, but I know this: they leave an enduring impression. In the week ahead, really the next couple weeks, I invite us all to hear the spiritual call of this sacred season, to hear the call of the shofar. As a reminder, you can hear it every morning at Minyan at 7:15 this week. And you've got to come to day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, because day 1 is Shabbat, and we don't sound the shofar on Shabbat. To hear it is to be truly awake, to be truly alive. It's to know that our acts make a difference, sometimes all the difference in the world. Shabbat Shalom.